Welcome to the Refurbishment Mastery podcast with me, Martin Rapley. If you're a property investor who is worried about paying too much for your next property, concerned that you don't know how to manage a refurb, or scared that you will be ripped off by a builder, then this is for you. In this podcast, I share over 30 years of experience of managing refurbishments and conversions to help you make more profit, save your time, and ultimately enjoy the process. On with the podcast. Hi there. In this episode, I'm going to talk to you about permitted development, particularly permitted development relating to residential housing opportunities. So the thing with permitted development is central government have brought in legislation over the years. It comes and goes, it changes, it gets improved, and perhaps some would say it goes backwards as well. But permitted development is something that allows us to do work to properties without having to seek a full planning permission for those work. It is sometimes mixed up with prior approval. I'm not going to go into the depth of that. Prior approval has a slightly different process because you do actually need to make some kind of application to your local authority planners. You just know what the rules are. What I'm talking about here is permitted development. And significantly, because there's so many angles of permitted development, this episode is solely about residential houses, and residential bungalows fits into that category as well, but it doesn't include flats. There's very few where there are permitted development rights within flats, but not significant rights. There's and I'll perhaps cover that very loosely relating to houses. There's basically two kinds of houses and bungalows that we might be talking about here. There's detached houses, and then there's semi-detached or terraced houses. The regulations are very, very close between the two. I will just highlight a few little changes that where the two have slightly different rules. The thing to note is I'm talking here about C3 residential houses, not a house that's already being used as a C4 HMO. That actually hasn't got any permitted development rights that I'm aware of, but there may be some little angles in there that a planning consultant could use to your benefit. And I think this is one of the important things. There's a lot of information. I'm going to tell you where you can find the information I'm going to refer to in this episode. So there's a lot of information out there, but you do need to keep your finger on the pulse. That legislation does change. There are some clever angles, and ultimately this is where planning consultants can help you navigate what's going on and ensure that you are up to date with the information. But as I say, there is a government website that you can refer to. It's on the planningportal.co.uk website. If you just Google interactive house, you will be presented with there's some graphics on there, and you can literally go through and see what I'm going to talk about now, because that's all I'm using here as a prompt, really, to talk about the salient elements of that website and salient elements of the legislation here. And this is all in the context that, as property investors, to eliminate an amount of risk, we may well want to make some alterations to a property within the permitted development rights, because then we don't have to submit any application. There's no paperwork, there's no chance of rejection, and we can therefore crack on with our work very, very quickly with a view of adding some value to a property. Now, some of the things I'm going to talk about may not add much value, but some things can add significant value. For instance, an extension or a loft conversion can add really good value. But some things may just be cosmetic, some may be a little bit more from to extend the life of the property, and they may not add quite so much value, but they may all be part of your big scheme, and ways of yeah, adding a general value, because we can't always measure the value that some of these things do. Some things we absolutely can, but some things we can't. So what I'm going to do is just talk you through elements of the interactive house on the planning portal. I'm not going to go through everything. I'm just going to go through some elements that may be significant from a property investment perspective, um, and yeah, may just sow some seeds and may open up some opportunities with some of the properties you've got. So this is in actually in alphabetical order, which is makes sense. And there's things in here that aren't so relevant. Things like adverts and signs and air source heat pumps, and building barbecues. I'm not going to go into those. There is a section on conservatories. I'm going to skip that because that comes up under extensions later on. The first thing that I'm just going to flag up, because it is something that I do talk to property investors about every now and again, is actually work out in the garden, and building decking. So if we want to improve gardens, we quite often deck out the rear area, particularly if it hasn't got, or particularly if the levels are a bit irregular. We can build that out without bringing in loads of soil. We'd have to build retaining walls and bring in soil if we've got irregular ground and we want to build a patio. So sometimes it's easier, quicker, and cheaper to build decking. But there is a little bit of permitted development or planning legislation around decking, and that is that your decking shouldn't be more than 30 centimetres above the ground. And in reality, it shouldn't cover more than 50% of the garden area as well. But I mean, that probably wouldn't be the case. You wouldn't be likely to exceed that. But it shouldn't be more than 30 centimetres above the ground. Now, that is a bit of a grey area, because if the ground's sloping away, you can actually be caught out there if you're not careful. I think you can push the boundaries a little bit here, but if you've got a steeply sloping rear garden, you would probably be wise to have a few steps down to the decking, to build at a lower level. Because in theory, if you take the legislation to its extreme, your decking would need to be sloping in line with the slope of the garden. So do be careful. This is all about stopping people standing on the decking and being able to look over into the neighbours. Well, not so much the windows, sorry, not so much the garden, but probably a little bit more the windows. So do be careful with decking. I have seen and heard of stories of people having to remove decking because they have, the height is too great above that floor level. So do just watch, particularly in sloping areas. There is a section that talks about dormer windows. I'll pick that up under loft conversions shortly. There's another section about dropped curbs. Now, curbs generally, so a dropped curb is where you put a slope in if you wanted to put a driveway on the front of your property. Now, dropped curbs don't generally need planning permission. There's a few tiny cases where they do, but they do actually need permission from the local authority, and you do need to use a local authority contractor to do that work. And it could be in some situations that the local authority wants to see your planning permission. That may not be relevant. There may not be planning permission relevant for what you're doing if you just want to put in a driveway, but they may well require some drawings. But that doesn't really fall under the planning side of things, and we don't need permission for that. Now, this is one of the big sections now. We're up to E for extensions. So, and I'm sure some of you are aware of extensions. Some of you are already clear on the legislation. I'm not going to go into the real depth in this podcast because of legislation here, because there's quite a lot of little nuances. But effectively, just to say that you can build extensions to your current property under permitted development. This is assuming, for all of this, everything I'm saying here, actually assuming also that we're not talking about listed buildings and that conservation areas haven't taken away some of these rights. So we're talking about normal residential houses in normal residential areas. Um, so there are some rules relating to how big some extensions can be. We mustn't cover more than half of the land around the original house with an extension. So do be careful where there's quite small gardens, attached to houses, that you can only extend on half of that. There's a few restrictions relating to heights. There's a few restrictions that make a difference as to how close it is to the boundary. There's some things you can't do. You're not allowed to put balconies onto them. You're not supposed to put chimneys. You can't build a chimney under permitted development either. So you may not want to, but if that's the feature of the property and you want to retain a chimney, then that does need planning. So we can build extensions to the rear of our property on semi-detached houses and terraced houses. They can be 3 meters from the rear of the original property. So remember, if someone has previously built an extension of, say, 3 meters, you can't build another 3 meters. So semi-detached and terraced houses are 3 meters from the rear of the original property. Detached houses are 4 meters from the rear of the original property. Now, on the rear of the property, they can actually be 2 meters high. Sorry, not 2 meters, they can be 2 stories high. There's a few other little regulations in there relating to windows being obscured if they're looking over to the neighbours. There's some regulations in there relating to roof pitch, but ultimately your architects will pick those up and design those as necessary to suit. Now, there is a prior approval application that can just take that 3 meter dimension and that 4 meter dimension and double it up to 6 and 8. That's a prior approval, so that is outside of what I'm talking about in this podcast. But don't overlook that. But you're still reliant on not being able to go more than 50% of the land around the property. And sometimes those kind of big extensions just do not work at all. Now, we can also build extensions on the side of our houses. So the rule for the side of the house is a single story extension only. And we can build that. The width of that single story extension must be no more than half of the width of the original house. So what you'll find is some small houses, if you take half of that width, actually that adds a really odd skinny bit on the side of the house and may not add a great deal of additional value. It will add more floor space and it will add value, but you may well find that the value it adds is less than the actual cost of doing that work. So that's the kind of rules with extensions. That applies to conservatories as well. It applies if you decide, although you're probably not going to, but if you decide to build a garage on the side of your house, that's exactly the same there, those same dimensions. So 3 meters or 4 meters on the back, half the width of the house on the side. But note, and this I have seen this catch people out before, back is on the back of the original house, side is on the side of the original house. If you build both of those simultaneously, you can't include that little corner where the two would join. So you can't effectively build an L shape, because if you made an L shape extension, then part of that extension would be an extension on an extension you're already building. So it's on the side of the existing house and on the rear of the existing house. And sadly, I have heard of people that have joined up the whole lot and had to reconfigure it, take it down, or indeed just put in a planning application to regularize that. So that's the common thing that we would regularly use permitted development for. And as I say, there's a few regulations relating to height and how close we get to the neighbour and a few things like that. But by and large, that's the overview, and you can take that knowledge now and speak to an architect who will, make it work for you, and design something that is going to be compliant for you. So the next one to talk about is external walls. This is something that comes up quite a bit. We talk about improving the outside of our property. Maybe we want to repair the existing external walls. Well, you're allowed to repair your existing walls. That's not a problem at all. You may decide that as part of that repair that you actually want to re-render the outside of the building. And generally, if you're not in a conservation area and it's not a listed building, you shouldn't have to apply for planning permission. It says if the materials are of similar appearance to those used in the construction of the house. I think the thing with render is there's probably other properties in your street that are rendered. And generally, I'm not hearing of anyone who has any difficulties rendering their properties over the top of the brickwork. But if you've got render at the moment, there's nothing to stop you hacking it all off and redoing it. There's also nothing to stop you painting it a different color. I think you would probably have some objections if you wanted to paint it some more outlandish colors, but if you painted it a fairly neutral color, I don't think you'd have a lot of trouble. In some conservation areas, there are restrictions as to what colors you can actually paint the outside of the house. As part of rendering a property, that may also include an external insulation system as well. The insulation itself doesn't fall under planning here, of course. It's just the external aesthetics, and you can clad that up in different ways as well. So by and large, you can lift the external aesthetics of the property. It's a little bit of a grey area because it does say that they should be of similar appearance to those used in the construction of the house. But I think because other houses are doing it, as long as it's not wildly out of keeping, you can probably get away with all of that. Let's jumping in to make sure that you have everything you need. Now, in a number of these podcasts, you would have heard me talk about my community, and I want to ensure that you know how you can join that community. Obviously, within these podcasts, there's a limit to the detail I can go into the recording. And of course, a lot of things are very generic. So what if you had access to join me on a Zoom call for 90 minutes every single week in a group coaching environment? You could get your questions answered whenever they come up and learn from other members' questions. Plus, you also get 10 hours of training videos, an HMO refurbishment case study, some sample documents and checklists that will help you run your projects far more effectively. Membership of my community is just £89 a month. You get the first month free, and you can also cancel anytime after that. Plus, as a listener of this podcast, there's a promo code to help you save £20 every single month that you remain a member. So just make a note of VIP discount 20, VIP discount 20, all in capital letters, and put that into the checkout. You'll find the checkout on my website, www.refurbishmentmastery.com. Scroll down the page, you'll find the link for the Project Management Accelerator. Use the promo code VIP discount 20 and you'll be signed up at just £69 a month. I look forward to seeing you in that community very, very soon. Now back to the podcast. The next one is fascias. So if you've got problems with fascias and gutters and things like that, all of that is just permitted development. So you can replace all of those. And if you've got white fascias and you decide to do them in black, no one's really going to cause you any trouble there. If you feel that's going to lift the property, then you should be okay. Now, something that again I've heard catch people out is new fences and walls and things like that. There is a little bit of legislation relating to building new walls. So if you've got an existing wall or a fence and it gets damaged, you can rebuild that. You can replace that to be exactly the same as it was. But if you want to build a brand new wall or put up a brand new fence and it's next to the highway, you can only build that 1 meter high. Um, and in fact, yeah, there's a few other things in there. There's some places where you can build it to 2 meters high already, but you can't make an existing wall higher. You can't make an existing fence higher. You can't, in theory, put a trellis on the top of a fence when it is adjacent to the highway. You can do things down the perimeter of your building, round the back and the sides into the back garden, but there's definitely some regulations relating to the front. So that would be worth having a look at if you are if you're building. Yeah, maybe as part of doing an extension, you want to reconfigure some fencing as well. Just watch that you're not contravening planning there. And by the way, highway includes the footpath, so this isn't just yeah, we're not just talking about the road here. We're talking about the footpath as well. I'm going to miss out a few other sections. There's bits in here about chimneys and flues. You do need planning permission for new chimneys to extensions, but you can do work to chimneys. There's bits in here about fuel tanks. Not going to dwell on those. Just to note on garages, garages can be built in the garden area of your property. You don't need any planning for that. You can build a garage on the side of your property within the requirements or the legislation of building extensions. So you could do that as well. You can also convert garages into a residential room where the garage is connected to the main property. But you cannot convert a garage into a separate house. So that does actually require planning permission. So, if you've got a house with an enormous double garage and an extension behind it, that cannot be carved off as a separate dwelling. That would be subject to a planning application. So don't be caught out with that. Other things listed, ground source heat pumps, you can do those. External lighting, if you're just upgrading and improving the existing lighting, you don't need planning for any of that. Gutters and downpipes, I've already talked about that. Manholes, you don't need permission, don't need planning permission for any of that. Let's just look at patios and driveways. There are some regulations relating to this. You're not supposed to hard pave more than 50% of your front garden. So you are supposed to leave quite an element unpaved. There is some there's a few little nuances in there depending on the product you use. If you use a porous product, then you can actually I think you can actually go more than 50%. But if you're not using a porous product, you've have got some restrictions there. So concrete is not porous, asphalt is, gravel is, and there's also some concrete blocks and things like that. And the ones where there's the little where you lay the little concrete bricks and blocks, that's porous as well, because there's gaps between each little paving stone. You do also need to consider drainage. You're not allowed to tip the drain if it rains, it mustn't tip back into the road. So you may need to put a slot drain between your driveway and the pavements. And there's a few other little regulations relating to some sizes there. The key thing here, and in fact, this is actually specifically flagged up in the portal. The key thing here is that this does not apply to flats. So everything I'm talking about here excludes flats. So you can't just get on and build a driveway to some flats. That would actually need full planning permission. So do be particularly careful if you want to pave your front garden. There are quite onerous restrictions there. It's not a no, there's just some restrictions. You can build a porch on the front of your property if you want to. There's some restrictions relating to how close to the how close it can come to the road. A porch also mustn't be more than 3 square meters, but that's obviously quite enormous. But it must be less than 2 meters away from the boundary of the pavement. So one of these older style houses where there's hardly any garden at the front or anything like that, just enough space for some bins or whatever. You're probably not going to be able to put porches on the front of those kinds of properties because they're just too close to the road. Roof windows in the slopes of the roofs, they're permitted. So you haven't got any issues there putting in roof lights. If you want dormers, then that comes under converting lofts. I'll come to that shortly. So you shouldn't need anything for roof lights, but there's a few little regulations in there relating to those. You can recover the roof. You can recover the roof in a suitable product. So if you've got slates there at the moment, you can change it to tiles. Again, assuming you're not in a conservation area or anything like that. So you've got no real restrictions there. You can put up satellite dishes, security alarms, and things like this. You do need to be careful if you want to bring additional buildings into the back garden. So this could be sheds, this could be workrooms, outbuildings, those kinds of things. The regulation is you're not allowed to have anything more than 2.5 meters from the ground. And it should be within 2 meters of the boundary of the dwelling house. So, of the garden space itself. It shouldn't have balconies, raised platforms, because that starts to contravene things like decking regulations. And no more than half of the land can be covered around the original house can be covered by a freestanding building. So these are the kinds of things that people use as workrooms, gyms, studies. It could just be a big shed, a garden room, something like that. The key thing with 2.5 meters is that doesn't give you the option of big pitched roofs or anything like that. So if you want something with a little bit more versatility inside, then you're going to have to start digging down, and some of it is going to end up being below ground level. So just consider that, depending on how you're designing things. There's nothing to stop you putting solar panels on the roof. There are some regulations relating to solar panels in your gardens. You can plant trees. You can take down trees as long as they haven't got tree preservation orders on them and they're not in conservation areas. You can prune trees to stop them being a nuisance and things like that. You can replace your windows. And again, Windows talks about being, you can obviously do repairs and maintenance. You can put new windows in that are of a similar appearance to those used in the construction of the house. Now, that's perhaps a little bit of a grey area, and we will change the styling of windows. No one's really going to moan about that. One thing it specifically flags up, which isn't something we would very often do as property investors, but you can't actually convert a flat window into a bay window. People put little bay front windows on the front of some properties, and that does need planning permission. And because if it's on the back of the property, it falls under the permitted development as an extension. It would be considered an extension that's kind of a foot deep. But you can't do that on the front without permission. That's not to say you won't get permission, but you will need to put in an application for that permission. When there's a few bits and pieces, there's nothing really stopping you doing anything inside your house at all. The big thing that we might do inside a house that we need to be a little bit mindful of is converting a loft into a habitable space. There are regulations relating to that. Generally, again, for a family house, a C3 family house, we can convert the loft. We can put a dormer on the rear side and permitted. We've already said that it's okay to put the roof lights in the sloping side at the front. There are some requirements relating to the size of those loft conversions, and it's measured in cubic meters, 40 for terraced houses and 50 for everything else. But in reality, certainly with the smaller houses, you're not going to be able to even achieve those kind of numbers because the original house is not likely to be large enough to exceed those. A big detached, you might be able to. We mustn't go. We mustn't build above the height of the existing roof, and there's a few other little things relating to balconies and the style of other bits and pieces as well. Um, but generally, we can convert lofts, so that is a really good angle for property investors. Otherwise, anything else you want to do in your house can be done. You don't need planning permission for doing anything inside your house. So I wanted to just reiterate again that everything I've just spoken about relates to C3 family houses. Semi-detached, terraced, and detached. There's a few little nuances relating to the extensions, particularly when it comes to thinking about. There's a few differences between terraced, semi-detached, and detached, but otherwise, they're all pretty much the same. Nothing relates to a listed building. You will always need permission to work in a listed building. There's a high chance that if you're in a conservation area, much of that is not permitted either. So do be careful in those situations. Also, just note that I'm talking about C3 houses. So you can't use permitted development as part of you can't use permitted development on a property that is already a C4 HMO or a sui generis HMO because that's now no longer C3. If you want to use permitted development towards a C4 HMO, then you would probably be wise getting a certificate of lawfulness to verify that you are actually extending a C3 house. And then after that's complete, you're going to use it as a C4 HMO. If you're wanting to extend as part of converting a house into some flats, say, then you would normally regularize the extension first in the same way, and then put in the application for the flats using that larger footprint. Planning consultants will help you navigate that. There is an element of there are permitted development rights to flats, but nothing really relating to what I'm talking about. It's mostly internal works that are all permitted development. You certainly can't have a flat and then go and put a dormer roof extension on it or extend it sideways. So the significant things that add value aren't going to work with flats either. And the other real important thing, just to finish off with, is that everything I've spoken about here is relating to planning only. A fair chunk of what I've spoken about will also need building regulation approval. And even some of the very minor works from a planning perspective may also need building regulation approval. So don't mix the two up. Everything I've been talking about in this podcast has been just to sow some seeds of things that you can do to a C3 family house under permitted development. And maybe there's some angles in there, maybe there's some things there you weren't aware of before, or were thinking you couldn't do because you weren't aware that they were permitted. Ultimately, I was just referring there to the government website. It's easy to follow. There's a graphic. You can click on the graphics, and it will flag up elements of the building. And then there's an index, a menu down the left-hand side, and you can literally just click on all of those. And I was just summarising all of that. So the information is all out there. And yeah, what I've shared with you in this episode is really just an overview to encourage you to have a look at it, B, perhaps give you a little bit more knowledge, but really to say that there are opportunities out there. But if in doubt, your friend here is actually going to be a planning consultant, possibly an architect as well, but planning consultants, absolutely, this is their bread and butter, understanding this kind of legislation. And a lot of them will often give a free 15-minute consultation if you've got a quick question, or they'll probably reply to an email if you've just got a little bit of uncertainty relating to some of this. But of course, yeah, you're welcome to talk to an architect, and you are going to need drawings for anything that needs building regulations anyway. So you're already going to be talking to an architect. So hopefully you've got a little bit of an overview for that. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll catch up with you in another episode very soon.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. Please do like, share, and leave a comment where you can. If you need any guidance or advice with anything to do with your refurbishments or conversions, then don't hesitate to reach out. You can book a free call with me by clicking on the link at the top of my website, refurbishmentmastery.com. There's other ways you can contact me in the show notes as well. I look forward to speaking to you again soon.